Well, hello, YouTube. It's that douchebag in a muscle shirt again, here to ramble some BS. Just doing my weekly check-in. Yeah, so today I think I'm gonna ramble about some anthropology kind of stuff, or yeah, I guess it would be physical anthropology, as this is one of the things I'm interested in, nerdy about, whatever. I like history, anthropology, and kind of interested in some manosphere topics. Kind of interested in a few other things, but yeah, this is haven't really. I think I did one video kind of halfway about this stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to do one that I think maybe we could keep a little short this time. Yeah, we're wearing the tattered old red muscle shirt. Always I'm all about fashion. I'm all about I'm all about the look. Anywho, so what am I going to talk about today? I'm not even sure. That's how unprepared I am. You know what? I'm going to talk about skin tone evolution in Northern Europe, or in skin tone evolution in general, let's say, but kind of with that emphasis, I think. So first of all, let's talk about the out of Africa theory, which yeah, well, first of all, in our earliest pre-genus Homo ancestors are called Australopithecines. They were probably hairy, given the fact that they were only maybe a step above, sort of a chimpanzee kind of thing. When we lost our apish hair, there we were in the blazing African sun, and we needed to adapt to have a dark skin tone in order to protect. We needed that melanin to protect our delicate skin from the sun. And so, probably the earliest humans were most likely very dark skinned. That said, there's probably always been natural variation given that. So, maybe not everybody was pitch black. There was probably, yeah, just the rolling the dice, genetics rolls the dice, and you get different tones, etc. So that is kind of our starting point. That's not mainly what I want to talk about, though. I want to focus in on. I'll just say one more thing about the out of Africa hypothesis. It's pretty sound, however, and it's been kind of the dominant theory for I think at least the last 40 years ish. It's kind of starting to see some holes in it. It's still probably, how should I say this? Africa is still probably sort of the core of early human evolution. However, it's starting to look like it might be more in and out of Africa. For example, Homo erectus, circa, 2 million, a million and a half years ago, may have they may have done some adapting in Asia, in Eurasia, but mainly Asia probably, adapted to certain things, and then returned to Africa with those characteristics which they adapted in Asia, and then contributing those genes which evolved in Asia to what would become Homo sapien in Africa. But this is still, controversial stuff. The sort of well, the out of Africa hypothesis is still, pretty much intact, but they're starting to get to be these little holes around the edges more and more in recent years. Nonetheless, it's still supported by a lot of archaeology and indeed genetics. And that's more to the point of what I want to get to here, because want to talk more about the how did white people get here? How did If we evolved in Africa, how did we come to be, more brown? Some people are more brown, some people are white, some people are just kind of a little bit tan, but whitish, etc. How did that come to be? Well, what's interesting is we used to think, I'm going to take a drink while I think. We used to think like white people had been around for a real long time, like maybe 50,000 years, more than that. Um, and then we started to discover various various specimens in parts of Europe ranging from around 7 to 11,000 years ago, and they tended to have blue eyes, but with very dark skin tones and very black hair. And Cheddar Man was in the news, and a lot of people didn't like how it was presented, things like that. I believe it was maybe exaggerated a little bit. They said he was a black guy with blue eyes. Well, we know that he had a darker skin tone, a much darker skin tone than most modern Europeans. We don't know that he was completely black. Also, the same gene that gives us blue eyes also gives us grayish eyes, so he might not have been purely blue-eyed. There may have been kind of an exaggeration on both ends of that for the sake of contrast. Anyway, but yeah, going back a minute to the out of Africa hypothesis, the genetic trail, at least for most of our genes, maybe 90% of our genes, maybe 10%, we have intermixed with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and maybe even just Homo sapiens that were outside of this group. But most of our DNA for all humans living today comes from basically a single group, probably a group of tribes that came out of Africa somewhere between 60 and like 76 ish, maybe 80 at the most, 1,000 years. Now, that Homo sapiens had come out of Africa before that, but based on the genetics, it looks like most of them either died out or went back to Africa. And the genetics that we are descended from comes from this group, this relatively small population, theoretically, coming out of Africa. When I say small, I mean small by today's standards. I mean, they're probably way bigger than the Neanderthals. But anyway, that's just another thought I thought I'd slip in. But anyway, this group of people came out of Africa somewhere between 60 and 76,000 years ago. Let's say 70,000 years ago, and everyone today has ancestry from them. Not just ancestry, like primary ancestry, like I said, 90+% of our genes come from these people. So, in evolution terms, that's a relatively short amount of time. I mean, in a way, it's a long amount of time, of course. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think 70,000 years. But in terms of species evolution, it's not that much. So we're not that terribly. It kind of goes to show we're not that terribly different necessarily from our fellow humans. Although when you do talk about that 10% difference, there's some things, but I won't get into all that. That's a little too complicated, a little too much you can do for a YouTube video. I'm trying to keep short, unlike last time. All right. So yeah, and then so they came out 60,000 years ago. First, and I think they kind of stayed in the general Middle East kind of area for maybe 10, 20,000 years, or at least most of them did. A few of them did make it all the way to Australia relatively early. Maybe there's a lot of different conflicting data and theories, but some say, as much as 64,000 years ago, there might have been Homo sapiens in Australia, but Others say even longer ago, and the others say no, not quite that long ago, maybe 40 something. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that in there. That you know, but talking more about how, but Australian Aborigines are still pretty dark skinned people. We're talking more today about how did people get light skinned. Well, people started going into Europe about approximately 40. The range is kind of 44 to 50,000 years ago. I tend to think it's more towards 50,000 years ago. The first Europeans, the first Homo sapiens started to colonize Europe. Now, there had been human forms in Europe prior, namely the Neanderthals, as most people know about, and also some other forms, Heidelbergensis, and maybe a little bit of late Erectus, but we're talking about the first Homo sapiens who may have been our ancestors is kind of the focus here that I'm trying to get at. Probably the first few waves probably died out without leaving much ancestry into modern populations. However, starting maybe late 30,000s, maybe say 39,000 years ago, we probably get a population that has some significant ancestry that still lives on in modern Europeans. And what they look like? Well, they had come out of Africa not too terribly long ago. Maybe 20 to 30,000 years ago. Probably they were. That's enough time for some differences to adapt. But it seems, given what we know about Cheddarman and these other guys we found in Europe, they were still pretty dark skinned up until very recently. Now, the further you go away from the equator, the less you need the melanin to protect you. However, there still isn't really a reason to lose that until the diet starts changing. And this seems to be key. Although, yeah, just being away from the equator probably over time will cause people to get lighter and lighter skin, but it probably would have taken a longer time, like tens of thousands of years. Like some Neanderthals had light skin. Some were darker, some were lighter, some were in between. But in particular, the Northern European Neanderthals had light skin. My guess is it probably took them tens of thousands of years to get that way. Europeans seem to have gotten light skin much more rapidly, and the trigger for them no, it's kind of itchy. Trigger for them getting light skinned more rapidly, starting around maybe 7-ish thousand years ago, was probably diet. Now, if you if you live in an area like Africa where you're getting just baked with rays from the sun, you're getting lots of vitamin D. Even if most of it's getting blocked out, you're getting so much that you're getting a lot of vitamin D from the sun. Getting vitamin D from the sun is the best, most natural way to get vitamin D, and it's very helpful. It has some immune properties. It's helpful for the immune system. It's helpful to keep your bones healthy. It's a very important thing. The thing is, our ancestors in Europe and Asia, I'm talking Northern Europe and Asia, and Northern Central, Southern-ish Europe, and kind of adjacent parts of Asia, would have for a long time been these like big game hunters, much like the Neanderthals, and also small game hunters. But the point is, their diet would have been very high in meat. Meat gives you a lot of vitamin D. So for tens of thousands of years, they didn't really need too badly, although over the course of this time they probably were slowly getting a little bit lighter skin from being out of that African environment. But they didn't really need an adaptation towards light skin. And that's the thing. The lighter your skin, the more effectively your body will take in that vitamin D from the sun. That seems to be the reason why we are white. Why some people have lighter skin. Depending on where you live, you you take in more or less vitamin D. You need more protection. It's kind of it's a balancing act between protection from the sun versus letting in the vitamin D. You need less protection the further up you get. So, as I was saying, if you've got a high meat diet, you don't necessarily need light skin. Then something happened about 7,000 years ago. You know what it is? Agriculture. Humans started monkeying around a little bit with agriculture, maybe as long ago as 14,000 years ago, but then we didn't start doing it intensely real good till maybe 9,000 years ago. And then, 8,000 years ago is when it kind of started being a thing in Europe. And then, and it probably would have started more southern Europe. And then 7,000 years ago, you got people in more central Europe doing agriculture and animal husbandry. So the diet changed more. This gets a little complicated because not everybody was doing agriculture, but they were doing more They started doing animal husbandry, cattle herding, pastoralism, and probably trading with agricultural neighbors, even if not everybody was doing agriculture, getting more grains, getting more. The overall point is more diverse food and trade was going on. Thus, the diet was changing. The diet was becoming more diverse, so less meat was being consumed, and that could create a potential problem in terms of a vitamin D deficiency unless you have light skin. So people with lighter skin tended to be healthier, live longer, and have more kids. And over a couple thousand years, that's how we got here. That's why we look like we do in Europe, and something parallel happened in Asia with like the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the sort of lighter skinned Asians. A similar thing happened. They turned from hunting to farming to rice farming, and at first it actually was something. It was like millet. I think it actually started out with millet, and then later on it became rice. But yeah, agriculture got going at kind of a similar ballpark of time. I think slightly later, maybe in the North Central China type areas, and then I used to think that maybe there was kind of a common ancestor thing, like kind of a common light skinned person who was the ancestral to both Asians and Europeans. But from most genetic studies I've seen, for the most part, and there might be a little grain of truth to that because you start talking Eurasia, you start talking the steppes of Eurasia, there's crossbreeding. But for the most part, it was parallel evolution. It wasn't the same ancestry for the most part, but it was the same pressures which resulted in the same general lightening of the skin. But it was primarily different ancestors, which is probably why, even though both, like Koreans and, say, the Irish have lighter skin than, say, Africans or people in South India, nonetheless it's not the same exact. There's a little bit of a difference in tone and that kind of thing. So that is basically how we got light skin. It was not altitude. What am I trying to say? Distance north, distance away from the equator played a role, but diet, much more than people realize, seems to have played a huge role in how we got to look like what we do today. And yeah, that's just, and I might have some further thoughts on this another time, but we're at 20 minutes, and I said I was going to try and keep this from being too terrible long. So I think I'll leave it there. So yeah, this has been your weekly talk from a guy with a douchebag talking some guy with a douchebag. You know what I'm saying? That's why I'm a douche because I can't talk, and yet I'm trying to be a YouTuber, right? Anyway, yeah, I hope this was informative and maybe a little humorous at times because that's kind of what I'm going for here, and I hope somebody actually watches it a little bit. And other than that, we'll check out and see ya.